Sorrow is better than laughter, wisdom still better than foolishness, and Solomon finds something more bitter than death, a woman. You're watching At the Pastor's Desk. You'll find as we go through chapter 7 that this chapter reads very much like a chapter from Proverbs. Lots of little tidbits of wisdom or things of vanity, often in this case. And so it'll jump around quite a bit, but stick with some general themes throughout. And so let's go ahead and dive into chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In this first section of chapter 7, we get two general themes that encompass all that is read. The first general theme is that sorrow is better than laughter. And he goes through a number of different things. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. Sorrow is better than laughter. And the reason that he gives for this, because this sounds like foolishness. This doesn't sound like wisdom. But what he's getting at is that through sorrow, when at the end of life, at death, for mourning, those who are wise learn what's important. They learn from that. Whereas times of pleasure and laughter, not only are they very quick, like Solomon describes in a few verses, but you don't learn much from that. You know, the saying goes, you learn from adversity. This is what Solomon is getting at, that it's these times of mourning and times of sorrow that we learn what's important. And this is what I hope as pastor at Faith, that the people here in the Dalles and across the world during this time of sadness and sorrow because of this pandemic, that they would learn what's important, that we would repent of our arrogance and pride and selfishness and focus on God, what we should be focusing on, obey that first commandment. Solomon then continues on with the second general theme, which is that wisdom is better than foolishness. And he says it in a lot of different ways. And listen through. Some of the examples are such. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. So he's describing how, better to hear the critique of someone who is wise than a person who's a fool singing a song and praising you. That you learn more from that critique of the wise one than the song of the fool. And he describes the fool as these thorns crackling under a pot, that they burn away quickly, and there's nothing to be gained. from that. They come quickly, they burn away, and they're gone. And that's the fool. And so the wisdom there serves a greater purpose. Solomon keeps focusing on wisdom because he sees wisdom as an advantage over foolishness. It provides things that foolishness does not. Look at verse 11. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. It's a good, he uses the word right there, advantage. It is more of an advantage to have wisdom than it is to have foolishness. And then in verse 12 he says, for the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. A better translation there with the Hebrew construction is that the protection of wisdom is better than the protection of money, which fits more in the theme of what Solomon has said in the past about wealth being vanity. Wisdom too is vanity when you don't have God connected with it. But it is better than wealth, because as he said with wealth, you cannot serve both God and money. So the protection of that wisdom is more important, it's better than the protection of wealth. And why? Well, he says right here, the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. This preservation of life, being wise, you make good choices, but also as a Christian, when a true wise person places their trust in God. As Solomon said in Proverbs, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And so the one who fears God not only preserves his earthly life, but preserves his eternal spiritual life when going on to heaven, and then the new creation and the new heaven and new earth when Jesus returns. Verse 14, in the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. In my vain life I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in evil-doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. God is the one who's in control. And honestly, sometimes that doesn't look to be the case. I mean, look at what Solomon says here. He says that the righteous man dies, and the foolish one prolongs his life by his works of evil. And this kind of seems opposite of what it should be. The righteous should be the one who's living long, and the foolish should be the one who's dying early. But this isn't always the case. And so Solomon says, don't be overly righteous and do not make yourself too wise. He's not saying don't be too good of a Christian or don't be too much of a sinner, hover in that middle ground. That's not what he's getting at. When he says don't be too righteous or don't get too much wisdom, a good example, don't go the way of the Pharisees. They focus so much on righteousness and so much on being wise and doing good things for themselves that it's like what Solomon said earlier, that the one who folds his hands eats his own flesh. He devours himself in his own selfishness. And so don't focus so much on yourself that it harms you, that it leads to your death. In the same way also, he says, do not be overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? You're going to sin, you're going to fall short, but don't embrace that. Don't go and sin more and more, but try and turn from that because sin leads to death always. And so we as Christians should strive away from that and strive to be righteous, not for ourselves, but for our neighbor and for God. And note what he says. He says that the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Both the wise and the fool, they die. But what comes out of that? What can bring you out of that? And that's the fear of God. God is the one who gives all gifts, and he's the one who can bring you out of death into life. And he gives the wisdom that Solomon speaks of here, the wisdom that gives strength. But as a bit of a reminder to pull you back, notice what Solomon says next. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. No one is righteous, no, not one. We hear this from Paul, we hear it from Solomon here. No one is righteous, only God is righteous. And this is why we are to fear, love, and trust in God above all things, because everything else is tainted with sin. Everyone else is corrupt. So why trust in that which is corrupt when you can trust in God, who is incorruptible? Verse 21. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off, and deep and very deep. Who can find it out? Solomon then gives a short bit of wisdom here, saying that you shouldn't listen to what everybody's saying about you. Don't listen to their curses about you or about others. It says here, your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. And so don't listen to those things. Don't care about those things. Trust that God is the one who's going to take care of you. And in fact, he says in the next verse, all of this he's tested by wisdom, said I will be wise, but it's far off from him. And who can find these deep things? Man cannot, only God can, and God reveals the wisdom in order to understand these things. And here we are, the part you've all been waiting for, Solomon saying that a woman is more bitter than death. Let's pick it up at verse 25. I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Now, I may have been a bit misleading in what I said, because see, Solomon here, when he's talking about this woman who has her heart is snares and nets and whose hands are fetters, he's not talking about just women in general. But in fact, he is using this imagery of a woman who is tempting and ensnares these other men away from their spouse as a form of idolatry. That this woman is not an actual woman, but this woman are certain idols that would draw you away from God. And this is why Solomon says that he who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Sinners are taken by these idols that, whatever that idol may be, money, science, themselves, other false religions, the sinner is taken by them and taken away from God, yet the one who believes remains faithful. And so this is speaking of idolatry. And it's rare to find a faithful Christian in our world. Narrow is the gate that enters into salvation. And so to find this, Solomon says it's very difficult. He says that he's only found one man among 1,000, and that many have sought out other schemes. And so it's hard to be a Christian, and it's few. But to trust in God and not be lured away by these temptations, these idols. Tomorrow we'll continue our walk through Ecclesiastes by looking at chapter 8. God bless.